Ancient Greece has always seemed to be the cradle of philosophy, art, and democracy. But strangely enough, behind its shining shell were hidden secret cults, forbidden rituals and prophecies that even after thousands of years haunt historians. Beneath the marble temples and among the myths of the gods lie mysteries that cannot be fully explained, each challenging our understanding of the past. In this video, we will introduce you to 25 mysterious facts about ancient Greece that will make you look at the history of the Mediterranean state in a different way. The oracles of Delphi are the voice of the mysterious past. In the heart of ancient Greece, at the foot of Mount Parnassus, there was a place that for centuries was considered the center of the world and held a reputation as a gateway to another otherworldly world. This was Delphi, a sacred space where the priestess Pythia spoke on behalf of Apollo, and her words were perceived as the voice of the deity himself. Thousands of pilgrims, including kings, generals, and philosophers, climbed the stone path to the temple to ask questions about war and peace, fate and wealth, life and death. But the essence of this phenomenon still remains a mystery. Where did her visions come from? Why did they have such power? And what was the true nature of the Delphic prophecies? Contemporaries described Pythia as a middle-aged woman, chosen by the priests according to strict rules. Before a divination session, she washed herself in the sacred spring of Castalia, chewed laurel leaves dedicated to Apollo, and then took her place on a tripod in the depths of the temple. It was believed that it was here, above the rift in the earth, that vapors rose from the cracks in the rock, giving her the ability to speak with the voice of a god. She fell into a trance, her words became confused, and the interpretation of these phrases fell on the shoulders of the priests, who turned them into prophecies. But were these truly divine revelations or a cunning system of manipulation? Many historians and archaeologists still argue about the nature of the Delphic phenomenon. Some believe that the vapors rising from the ground could actually contain substances that cause an altered state of consciousness. Research has shown that there is a fissure under the temple from which ethylene gases evaporated, which have a strong psychotropic effect. When inhaled, they could cause ecstatic visions, hallucinations, and a sense of unity with a higher power. Others argue that the oracle's power was based not on chemistry, but on the art of interpretation. The priests had extensive knowledge of politics, economics, and culture, and using the Pythia's vague phrases, they could issue predictions that suited any situation. However, the secret of the Delphic prophecies lies not only in the mechanism of their origin, but also in the extent to which they determine the course of history. Thus, according to legend, King Croesus turned to the oracle when he was preparing to attack Persia. The answer was ambiguous. If he came out, he would destroy the great kingdom. Inspired by these words, Croesus started a war, and the kingdom that was destroyed was his own. Such stories show that the mysterious power of Delphi was based on an ambiguity that turned every prophecy into a psychological weapon. The secret of the Pythia is also hidden in the atmosphere of the ritual. The huge temple, the columns, the sacrificial fires, the smell of incense and resin, the loud choir of priests, the sounds of the aulos and lyre, all this plunged the visitor into a state of sacred horror. Even if the Pythia uttered only a few incoherent words, in the minds of the listeners they turned into a key to fate. A person who came to the temple was already ready to hear signs and believe in their divine power. But there is another level of mystery. The question is where the cult itself originated and why this particular place became central to the prophecies. The ancient Greeks believed that there was once an omphalos here, a stone symbolizing the navel of the earth associated with the myth of Zeus, who released two eagles from the ends of the earth, and they met in Delphi. Thus, the place was initially considered sacred. Perhaps it was this belief that gave the cult its special power, allowing it to survive for centuries and influence minds even when empires fell and new religions arose. Today, the ruins of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi still attract thousands of tourists, archaeologists, and mystics. Standing among the ancient stones, it is difficult to shake the feeling that something inexplicable really is hovering here, as if these mountains still echo with voices that came from the depths of time. The oracles of Delphi are not just a historical phenomenon, but also a mystery of human faith. Was Pythia just a woman who inhaled poisonous fumes, or did she actually become a conduit for forces that cannot be explained by science? The answer remains beyond our understanding, and that is why this story still evokes awe and bewilderment. Labyrinth of the Cretan Minotaur. On the island of Crete, in the ancient city of Knossos, archaeologists have excavated a majestic palace complex whose corridors and passages amazed researchers with their intricacy. It was here, as many ancient authors believed, that the legendary labyrinth was located, the place where King Minos kept a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull. The story of the Minotaur seems like a myth born of the imagination of poets, but the mystery is that the ancient Greeks perceived it as reality, and the image of the labyrinth still haunts minds. The myth tells that Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, fell in love with a sacred bull sent by Poseidon. From this relationship, a monster was born that could not be left among people. The architect Daedalus built a gigantic labyrinth from which no one could escape. In its dark passages and endless forks, the Minotaur devoured the young men and women that the Athenians were forced to send to Crete as tribute. Only Theseus, with the help of Ariadne and her ball of thread, was able to pass through the corridors and kill the monster. But was the labyrinth a fiction or a real place? When British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating the Palace of Knossos in the early 20th century, he found a gigantic complex of many halls, passages, and staircases. The layout was so complex that even modern researchers sometimes have trouble navigating. Some scholars believe that it was these ruins that gave rise to the legend of the labyrinth, and the Minotaur became a symbol of the cruel rituals and human sacrifices that may have taken place in Crete during the Minoan civilization. But the mystery becomes even deeper if we recall the details. Images of bulls are found everywhere in Minoan art. Frescoes of acrobats jumping over animals, statues with their heads, ritual horns made of stone. The cult of the bull was so strong that many researchers suggest its connection with sacrificial practices. Perhaps the legend of the Minotaur is an echo of ancient rituals, where young men and women became victims of a sacred animal. There is another version. The labyrinth was not a building, but a symbol. Ancient labyrinths were used in many cultures as magical symbols of the soul's path, trials and transitions between worlds. Perhaps the myth of Theseus is an allegory of initiation, where the hero goes through the darkness, defeats the monster inside himself, and returns to the light renewed. In this case, the labyrinth was not only architecture, but also a reflection of human consciousness. However, archaeological finds continue to suggest that there was a concrete reality behind the myth. Knossos has been found to contain intricate systems of underground rooms, storage rooms, casemates, and long, narrow corridors. Some researchers claim that in ancient times, these places could have been perceived as an incomprehensible labyrinth. If you imagine a young man or woman being led into these dark dungeons, it is easy to understand how fear and the legend of a monster that never lets go of its victims were born. And yet, the most astonishing thing about this story is that we still cannot say with certainty where the real labyrinth was. Some archaeologists believe that the real underground complexes are hidden deeper than the excavated palace, and that traces of the great structure are still waiting to be discovered. Others are sure that the labyrinth never existed in a physical sense, but became an image reflecting the cruel laws of time and faith in the gods. Today, the myth of the Minotaur is perceived as one of the most powerful metaphors of antiquity. The labyrinth has become a symbol of human life, full of dead ends, circles, and trials, and the Minotaur is the personification of internal fears that everyone must overcome. And yet, standing among the ruins of the Palace of Knossos, you feel a strange excitement, as if the walls and stone passages contain the echo of the footsteps of those who once believed that a monster lurked behind every door. The Curse of Atreus, a dynasty doomed to blood and betrayal. The story of the Atreus family is one of the darkest and most disturbing legends of ancient Greece, intertwining curses of the gods, oaths broken in blood, and a series of betrayals that left this dynasty no chance for a peaceful fate. The genealogy begins with Tantalus, the king who dared to feed the gods the flesh of his own son to test their omniscience. This act shook Olympus, and the curse laid by the gods fell not only on him, but on all his descendants. Even when the gods resurrected the murdered boy Pelops, the evil fate had already taken root, and the blood of this family doomed it to an endless series of crimes. Pelops, Tantalus's surviving son, himself became the source of a new round of curses. According to legend, he beat King Oenomaus in a race to marry his daughter Hippodamia. But the victory was achieved by cunning. The charioteer Myrtilus, betrayed by Pelops, cursed him before he died. From then on, every descendant of this family became a hostage to the sinister force, and no sacrifice to the gods could cancel it. The greatness of the Atreides always coexisted with horror, and their power was fed by the blood of their loved ones. The curse is most famous in the story of Pelops' sons, Atreus and Thyestes. The two brothers, divided by envy and lust for power, fought until their last breath. Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife, and in revenge, Atreus threw a horrific feast. He fed his brother the flesh of his own children, and then showed him the remains. From then on, the name of the Atreus became a symbol of bloody crimes that could not be forgiven. The wrath of the gods did not weaken, but was simply passed on from generation to generation. The children of Atreus, Agamemnon and Menelaus, became heroes of the Trojan War, but their fates were also overshadowed by evil fate. Agamemnon, who led the Greek army, committed a crime at the beginning of the campaign, which was sacrificed to the goddess Artemis. To appease her and get a fair wind for the ships, he killed his daughter Iphigenia. This act became a new point in the series of crimes of the family, and the shadow of retribution fell on his house. When he returned from Troy, his wife Clytemnestra, filled with hatred for the death of her daughter, killed her husband in his own palace. But the bloody cycle did not end there. Their son Orestes, driven by a thirst for revenge and duty, killed his mother Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. However, the murder of his mother became a new crime against the gods for him, and the Erinyes, goddesses of vengeance, began to haunt him. Only long wanderings and the intervention of Athena allowed Orestes to find forgiveness. But even then, the curse did not disappear completely, because it was woven into the very fabric of the family. The story of the Atreus is more than just a myth about a family tragedy. It is a reflection of the ancient Greek idea of the inevitability of fate and punishment that haunts generations. Violating the laws of hospitality, killing relatives, insulting the gods, each crime triggered a new round of violence. In this endless spiral, blood was not washed away by time, but only caused more blood. Modern historians see in the legend of Atreus an archetypal plot where Greek poets and playwrights showed how personal passions and the thirst for power destroy entire dynasties. But there is a more mystical explanation. In the ancient consciousness, the curse of a family was not a metaphor, but a reality. The shadow of a crime could haunt descendants, like dark energy transmitted through generations. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why the tragedies about the fate of the Atreises, from Aeschylus to Euripides, were perceived by viewers as a revelation and a warning. Even after millennia, the story of the Atreus remains a symbol of inevitable retribution. It reminds us that neither power nor wealth nor glory can protect from punishment if the divine order has once been violated. And in this dark legacy, lies the greatest horror. Once blood has been shed, it is impossible to stop its flow until all circles of suffering have been passed. The mysteries of Eleusis, the secret path to immortality. Among the many cults and rituals of ancient Greece, a special place was occupied by the Eleusinian mysteries, rituals that for centuries were considered the most sacred and terribly guarded. Their center was in the small town of Eleusis, not far from Athens, and they were dedicated to the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. These mysteries promised their participants not just the favor of the gods, but something much greater, the secret of life and death, knowledge that, according to the ancients, granted immortality of the soul. The origins of the ritual go back to the myth of Persephone's abduction by Hades. When the god of the underworld took Demeter's daughter to his dark domain, the mother in despair stopped the growth of grains and the fertility of the earth. Only after Zeus's intervention was Persephone able to return to her mother for part of the year and spend the rest of the time in the realm of the dead. This myth became the basis of the mysteries: death and rebirth, winter and spring, departure and return. Initiation at Eleusis symbolized each person's personal path to understanding this eternal mystery. Every year, thousands of people, from ordinary citizens to philosophers and kings, traveled to Eleusis along the sacred way. But what happened inside the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, was carefully hidden. Participants were forced to keep absolute secrecy under threat of death. That is why the exact content of the ritual is still unknown. Archaeologists have found only fragments of vessels, traces of sacrificial fires, and remains of a drink called kykeon. But the meaning of the symbols and actions that took place at night in the temple remains shrouded in darkness. Only circumstantial evidence remains. The initiates said that they saw a light that was neither like the sun nor like fire, and that this encounter changed them forever. Plato wrote that the mysteries gave hope for a better fate after death. Aristotle claimed that in Eleusis they did not teach anything specific, but forced one to experience a special state. This state, in all likelihood, became the key to the feeling of immortality. Modern researchers put forward several versions. Some believe that kykeon, a drink made from barley and mint, could contain hallucinogenic substances, possibly ergot, which caused visions. Others suggest that it was the theater of the ritual itself. The darkness, the torches, the loud chants, the smell of sacrificial smoke, and the tension of anticipation created a powerful emotional experience that was perceived as a meeting with the gods. Whatever the reason, the fact remains. The mysteries of Eleusis had a colossal effect on the psyche of the participants, and many of them said that after that they stopped fearing death. The Eleusinian mysteries retained their power for over 1,000 years. Even when the Roman Empire extended its power to Greece, the new rulers not only did not forbid the rites, but also took part in them themselves. Emperors Augustus, Marcus Aurelius, and even Julian the Apostate considered the initiation at Eleusis to be one of the most important spiritual milestones in their lives. Only at the end of the 4th century, when Christianity had finally established itself in Rome, were the mysteries banned. Their temple was destroyed, and the secret, guarded by generations of priests, sank into oblivion. Today, only the ruins of the sanctuary can be seen at Eleusis, but they still evoke a sense of unsolved mystery. For thousands of years, people have tried to understand what was hidden behind this ritual. Was it an initiation into the secret knowledge of the nature of life and death? Or was it a carefully staged spectacle, the purpose of which was to instill faith? In any case, the mysteries of Eleusis remain a symbol of hidden knowledge, inaccessible to most, and attract attention to themselves as strongly as in the era of antiquity. The Phaistos disc is the unsolved language of ancient Greece. Among all the finds related to ancient culture, one occupies a very special place. We are talking about the mysterious artifact known as the Phaistos disc. It was found in 1902 in the ruins of the Palace of Phaistos on the island of Crete, and since then it has become one of the greatest mysteries of archaeology. The disc, made of baked clay, has the shape of a perfect circle with a diameter of about 15 centimeters and a thickness of about 2 centimeters. On both sides are spiral rows of symbols, just over 240 in all. These signs are carefully pressed into the soft clay using stamps, making the disc the first known example of the use of printing technology in human history. But the most important thing about it is that no one has yet been able to accurately decipher its contents. When archaeologist Luigi Pernier first presented the disc to the scientific community, interest was enormous. The symbols on it looked familiar and alien at the same time. Among them, one can discern images of heads, feathers, weapons, animals, and geometric figures. But they do not resemble either the Greek alphabet or the known writings of the Minoan or Mycenaean civilizations. Scientists immediately realized that they were looking at a text created by a writing system of which we have no other evidence. This circumstance made deciphering it almost impossible, since new writings are usually deciphered by comparing them with other sources, and in the case of the Phaistos disc, there are no analogs. Since then, dozens of hypotheses have been proposed. Some researchers believe that the disc was a hymn or religious text dedicated to a goddess who was worshipped in Crete. Others suggested that it was a calendar or instructions for performing rituals. There were versions that the symbols were related to the military sphere, or even that it was a spell designed to protect the inhabitants of the palace from disasters. Some scientists said that the disc may not be a text, but simply a game or a decorative object. But none of these versions have ever received convincing confirmation. The technique of applying symbols has always attracted special attention. The fact that stamps were used suggests that such discs were mass-produced, but not a single other example has been found during the entire excavation. This makes the Phaistos disc a unique artifact that seemed to appear out of nowhere and has never been repeated anywhere else. If at least a few similar objects had been found, perhaps scientists would have been able to compare them and identify patterns. But the singularity of the find only enhances its mystical aura. In the 20th century, bold hypotheses emerged that the Phaistos disc was connected to Atlantis or other lost civilizations. Attempts were made to compare it with the writings of the Etruscans, Egyptians, Hittites, and even Sumerians. But the similarities always turned out to be superficial. There were also more exotic ideas, for example, that the disc was a message from an extraterrestrial civilization, or that it was a clever forgery created in modern times to mislead archaeologists. However, clay analysis showed that the artifact is indeed ancient, dating back to approximately the second half of the second millennium BC. There are also versions that the symbols on the disc are not written, but musical notation or a system of transmitting oral traditions. In this theory, the spiral shape of the text symbolizes a song or hymn that was performed in a circle. There are researchers who are sure that this is an encrypted code or a magic formula. Some modern cryptographers have even tried to apply computer analysis methods, but the results have not given a clear answer. The archaeological context is also unclear. The disc was found in the basement of the palace next to other Minoan artifacts, but none of them contain similar symbols. Moreover, many researchers believe that the disc could have been brought to Crete from another unknown to us culture, which would explain the lack of parallels in Minoan art. If so, then the Phaistos disc becomes not only a mystery, but also evidence that there were contacts in the Mediterranean with civilizations about which we know nothing. The ancient Greeks' attitude to words and writing lends a special mystery to the artifact. For them, writing was not just a way of recording information, but a means of communicating with gods and spirits. The texts had magical powers, and words could change destinies. If we take this into account, it is quite possible that the Phaistos disc was created as a sacred object, and its symbols were not intended to be read by people, but to be perceived by the gods. This turns the disc into a kind of mystical artifact, amulet or spell. Today, the Phaistos disc is kept in the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion, Crete. Thousands of tourists come to see it every year, and many admit to feeling a strange sense that this small piece of clay holds a secret beyond the human mind. There is indeed something unsettling about it. The spiral lines that lead into the center seem to beckon into the unknown, where the answer lies. The story of the Phaistos disc shows how fragile our knowledge of the past is. We are accustomed to thinking that we know almost everything about ancient Greece, that myths and archaeology have come together to form a clear picture. But a single artifact can turn this feeling upside down. It reminds us that the ancient world held many secrets that we have not yet uncovered, and that behind the glitter of marble temples and the names of great philosophers lie layers of forgotten civilizations. Perhaps one day science will find the key to this mystery. But for now, the Phaistos disc remains a silent witness to a bygone era, whose mystery continues to live in our questions and assumptions. Curses on lead tablets are voices from the darkness of Athens. Hidden among the grand temples and philosophical schools of Athens was a dark side of Greek culture that was rarely discussed in textbooks. Archaeologists excavating necropolises and sanctuaries found small, unremarkable pieces of lead covered with strange inscriptions. These objects were called defixio, curse tablets. They were rolled up, pierced with nails, and hidden in tombs, wells, or under temple slabs so that the words written on them would reach the subterranean deities. And it is these finds that show that even in the center of ancient civilization, belief in curses and magic was as strong as the worship of the Olympian gods. Tablets dating from the 5th century BC onwards contained spells aimed at enemies, rivals, and even lovers. The Athenians, who supposedly lived in a society based on rational thought, used magic to influence the outcome of lawsuits, athletic competitions, and love affairs. Some called upon the gods of the underworld to bind the tongue of an opponent in court, others to deprive an opponent of strength in the arena, and still others to bind the heart of a desired woman to themselves so that she could not resist. These spells, written in clumsy letters, looked desperate, like the cry of a man who believed that fate could be broken by the power of words. The mechanism of the curse was based on interaction with chthonic deities. Most often, the texts mentioned Hecate, the goddess of dark magic and crossroads, Persephone, the queen of the dead, and even Hermes Chthonios, the guide of souls to the underworld. The author of the spell seemed to be passing his wish into the hands of otherworldly forces, hoping that they would fulfill it beyond the world of the living. The tablet was pierced with nails or rolled into a tight scroll to enhance the symbolism of binding and securing the spell, and hidden in places where the soul of the dead could deliver a message to the gods. Archaeologists have found hundreds of such tablets in Athens, especially in the Kerameikos, the city's largest cemetery, where they were buried with the bodies of the dead, as if sending a letter to the world of shadows. Some found their place in wells. It was believed that water serves as a guide to the underworld. There are cases when tablets were laid directly in the sanctuaries of the gods, which seems paradoxical. In the temple of Athena or Zeus, you could find a secret message filled with hatred and envy. What makes these finds especially mysterious is the language they are written in. Most of the wording is simple and straightforward, but some contain magical words that cannot be translated. Scientists suggest that these are special spell formulas that have no meaning in ordinary speech, but possess magical power. Such words remind us that ancient people saw language not just as a means of communication, but as a tool capable of changing reality. There is another side to this tradition. Curses were not always weapons against enemies. Sometimes they were used as a means of protection. The texts that have been found contain requests to protect the family from illness, the house from fire, the harvest from the evil eye. But most often, the tablets were full of malice and envy, feelings that hid behind the facade of democratic institutions and philosophical schools. Some scholars believe that the widespread use of these practices is linked to the instability of Athenian society. Litigation was part of everyday life, and winning or losing in court could decide a person's fate. In such circumstances, turning to magic seemed like a last-ditch attempt to tip the scales in one's favor. Sports, politics, love, everything could become an arena for magical intervention. Particularly impressive are the finds where the texts have preserved names. Where a person wrote the name of an enemy or a lover, history comes to life. We can imagine real people who lived in Athens more than 2,000 years ago and believed that lead and words could subjugate fate. This creates a strange sense of closeness. In these spells, we see the same passions that drive people today: envy, fear, thirst for power, and love. But the main question remains: did these curses work? For ancient man, the answer was obvious. If the enemy lost the case, if the rival stumbled in the arena, if the beloved was nearby, this was proof of the power of magic. Modern science is inclined to see in this the effect of self-hypnosis and psychological pressure. Belief in a curse could break the spirit of the enemy even before the trial or battle. But for the Greeks, this was not an explanation, but a confirmation. Today, the curse tablets are displayed in museums, but even under glass they retain their disturbing power. Dull metal, crooked letters, strange formulas. All this seems to carry a whisper from the depths of centuries. They remind us that the world of Athens was not only the world of Plato and Socrates, but also a world of secrets, fears, and dark rituals. And in this duality, the light of philosophy and the darkness of magic, lies the real mystery of ancient Greece. Chimeras and gorgons are the embodiment of fear in ancient Greece. The world of ancient Greece was not limited to temples and philosophy. It was filled with images of monsters that embodied man's deepest fears. Among them, a special place is occupied by chimeras and gorgons, creatures that balanced on the edge of myth and reality, symbolizing chaos, destruction, and incomprehensible forces that ancient man encountered. These images have survived thousands of years and still remain symbols of the horror hidden in myths. The chimera was first mentioned in Homer's poems. It was described as a monster with the body of a lion, a tail in the form of a snake, and a goat's head growing out of its back. Flames burst from its mouth, capable of destroying everything around it. Its pedigree goes back to the darkest family of monsters. According to myths, it was the daughter of Typhon and Echidna, the beings who gave birth to many other monsters of Greek mythology. The chimera lived in Lycia and terrorized its lands until the hero Bellerophon, riding the winged horse Pegasus, struck it down with a spear. But even this victory was ambiguous. The chimera personified the forces of nature, and its destruction could only symbolize a temporary victory of man over the elements. The symbolism of the chimera is multi-layered. For the ancient Greeks, it was more than just a mythical monster. Its mixed nature, lion, goat, and snake, reflected the idea of chaos, the disruption of the natural order. The lion symbolized strength, the snake, death and darkness, and the goat, wildness and rebellion. Combined in one body, they created a creature beyond comprehension. In this sense, the chimera was not just an enemy, but also a warning that the world is full of secrets beyond the understanding. No less terrifying was the image of the gorgon. Medusa is the most famous, but she also had sisters, Stheno and Euryala. They all had snake hair and a look that turned a person into stone. It is believed that the gorgons were originally depicted as monstrous demons with fangs, bulging eyes, and snake bodies. Later, the image of Medusa softened, and she acquired the features of a woman, but her monstrous essence did not disappear. The myth of Perseus defeating Medusa is familiar to everyone. The hero used a mirror shield to avoid meeting her gaze directly and cut off her head. But even after death, her power did not disappear. Pegasus was born from Medusa's blood, and the head itself was used as a weapon capable of turning enemies into stone. This plot shows the ambiguity of the image. The death of the monster does not destroy its power, but only transfers it into another form. In the ancient consciousness, the Gorgons were not just monsters, but symbols of the limits of human experience. Their gaze turned the living into stone, which can be interpreted as a metaphor for the horror that paralyzes the will. In this sense, the Gorgon is not an external enemy, but an internal fear that paralyzes a person. Medusa became a symbol of the fact that horror cannot be defeated without looking it in the face, even if it requires using a mirror, that is, conscious reflection, wisdom, and caution. Interestingly, images of Gorgons are often found in the architecture and decorative art of ancient Greece. Their faces were placed on shields, temples, and amulets. It was a paradoxical device. A terrible creature became a protector. The belief was that horror imprinted in stone could repel another horror. This was the manifestation of the magical logic of the ancients. The power of evil could be turned into good if it was contained in a symbol. Modern scholars interpret chimeras and gorgons not only as mythological images, but also as a reflection of the psychology of ancient society. They were the personification of fear of nature, disease, death, and war. In conditions when man was vulnerable to the elements, the monsters of myths became a way to express anxiety and an attempt to gain power over them. The hero's victory over the monster symbolized the hope that even the most terrible forces can be tamed. But the mystery remains. Where did such images come from? Some researchers believe that the chimera and the gorgon were generated by observations of real animals. Meeting poisonous snakes, lions, and other predators could have generated images of hybrid creatures. Others are sure that we are talking about symbols that came from the most ancient cults of the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological finds support this. Images of creatures with snake bodies and scary faces are found in the culture of the Hittites, Phoenicians, and Egyptians. Perhaps the Greeks inherited these images and reinterpreted them in their myths. Today, the chimera and Medusa live on in culture. Their images appear on coats of arms, paintings, sculptures, and even in the logos of modern brands. But behind this modern use lies an ancient, almost primordial force. These monsters remind us that fear is something built into human nature, and the myths about them are not just fairy tales, but a reflection of the inner world of people who lived more than 2,000 years ago. Chimeras and gorgons remain a mystery of ancient Greece. Whether they were just figments of the imagination or reflections of real cults, we will probably never know. But one thing is certain. Their images are the key to understanding how the ancient Greeks saw the boundary between the world of people and the world of dark, destructive forces that cannot be fully comprehended. The prophecies of the Sibyls are the voices of timeless women. Among all the mysteries of ancient religion, a special place is occupied by the Sibyls, prophetesses whose voices were perceived as revelations from the gods themselves. Their images are shrouded in the fog of myths, and their predictions were often perceived as something more than the words of people. Sibyls could appear in different places, from Asia Minor to Italy, and in each city where they spoke, they were revered as intermediaries between mortals and a higher power. And although different sources give different names, Cumean, Erythraean, Delphic, Pergamon, and many others, they had one thing in common. They spoke as if they knew not only the present, but also the fate of future generations. The most famous image was the Cumean Sibyl, mentioned in the works of Virgil. It was she, according to legend, who led Aeneas to the underworld, where he saw the fate of Rome and the predetermined future. Her prophecies were recorded in the famous Sibylline books, collections of revelations kept in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitol. These books were so sacred that they were opened only in times of greatest danger, during wars, epidemics, and disasters. The priests turned to them to find advice on sacrifices and rituals that could appease the gods. But the mystery of the Sibyls was not only in their words, but also in the nature of their gift. Many ancient authors describe them as women who fell into ecstasy, as if their bodies and voices became instruments of the deity. They could scream, sing, speak in strange rhythmic formulas. It was reminiscent of the state of the Pythia at Delphi, but with even greater wildness and unpredictability. Some scholars believe that this state was caused not only by psychological stress, but also by the use of plants or vapors that caused an altered state of consciousness. However, for the Greeks and Romans, it was direct evidence that the Sibyls were becoming vessels for the divine will. The Sibylline books themselves were a source of mysticism. Legend has it that they appeared in Rome under mysterious circumstances. An old woman, who was later identified with one of the Sibyls, brought 9 books of prophecy to King Tarquinius and demanded a huge price for them. When the king refused, she burned 3 books and offered the rest for the same price. The king refused again, and the old woman burned 3 more. Only then did he buy the remaining 3 books for the same price that was offered for all 9. Thus, texts appeared in Rome that allegedly contained knowledge about the fate of the entire nation. The secret of these books is that their contents were never published in full. The priests quoted only individual phrases, and only at critical moments. Moreover, the books were destroyed several times. Once during a fire in the capital, later they tried to restore them from other sources. This created an aura of elusiveness, as if the gods themselves wanted humanity to never have full knowledge of the future. Sibyls also figured outside of Greece and Rome. The Erythraean Sibyl, for example, predicted that Troy would fall, and later that a savior would appear who would change the world. In the Middle Ages, her words were interpreted as prophecies about Christ, making the Sibyls part of the Christian tradition. In Renaissance churches, their images can be found next to the figures of biblical prophets. What is especially puzzling is that the prophecies of the Sibyls were always ambiguous. They could be understood in different ways, and each new era saw in them a reflection of its own anxieties. This principle is reminiscent of the work of the Delphic oracle, but in the case of the Sibyls, special emphasis was placed on the poetic and mystical form of speech. The word became an instrument capable of both inspiring and frightening. Scholars are still debating what was behind the image of the Sibyls. Were they real women with extraordinary abilities? Or was it a collective symbol, a mythological image created to lend authority to the decisions of priests and rulers? The first is supported by the fact that their descriptions are found in different places and cultures, and with surprising similarities. The second is supported by the fact that the prophecies of the Sibyls have always been used for political and religious purposes. Nevertheless, the phenomenon of the Sibyls remains one of the most persistent mysteries of antiquity. Their images have been preserved in art, literature, and religious texts, and their prophecies, as before, sound as if they were addressed not only to their contemporaries, but also to us. They remind us that man has always sought to look beyond the edge of time, to hear the voice of fate, even if this voice was full of fog and ambiguity. And herein, perhaps, lies their greatest secret. The Sibyls became not just prophetesses, but symbols of humanity's very thirst for knowledge of the future. Their words, lost and distorted, live on, because the very idea that somewhere beyond human experience there is knowledge of destiny will never cease to haunt our minds. The mystery of the Trojan War, myth, history, or a fusion of two realities. Of all the legends of ancient Greece, none is more majestic and at the same time mysterious than the story of the Trojan War. For thousands of years it has inspired poets, artists, and philosophers, and yet the question still remains: was this war a real event, or just a myth created to explain ancient fears and dreams? Homer's Iliad, one of the greatest works of antiquity, tells the story of the last year of the siege of Troy. The plot centers on the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon, the exploits of the heroes, and the decisive role of the gods who intervened in the battles. But behind the grandiose descriptions lies a historical intrigue. Did Troy exist? And was there really a war between the Greeks and the inhabitants of the Asia Minor lands that lasted for many years? This question was first raised by scholars of the New Age who doubted the authenticity of the poems. Until the 19th century, Troy was considered fiction, until the German explorer Heinrich Schliemann began excavations in Asia Minor near the hill of Hissarlik. There he discovered the ruins of a multi-layered city that had existed in different eras. Among these layers, one, dating back to around the 12th century BC, coincided with the supposed time of the Trojan War. Walls, fortifications, and traces of destruction were found. Schliemann announced to the world, Troy existed, and therefore the myth was based on a real event. But the mystery did not disappear, it only became more complicated. Archaeologists soon realized that the city had been destroyed not once, but several times. Which of the layers corresponded to Homer's Troy? Some claimed it was Troy 6, destroyed by an earthquake. Others favored Troy 7a, burned during the war. But even if the destruction was due to an outside attack, that doesn't mean the war was as Homer described it. Historians have hypothesized that the Trojan War could have been a reflection of real conflicts between the Achaeans and the peoples of Asia Minor for control of trade routes. Troy was located in a strategically important place, controlling the Dardanelles Strait, connecting the Aegean and Black Seas. The capture of this city would mean control over the trade in grain, metals, and other resources. Thus, the war could be economic, and the legends about the abduction of Helen only a mythological cover for political interests. But there is another side to the issue. Many researchers are sure that the Trojan War is not a single event, but a collective image created from many different conflicts. The wars that took place in the Bronze Age were intertwined in the people's memory, and poets turned them into a single myth. This is how an epic was born, where real battles merged with images of gods, heroes, and miracles. The role of the gods in the Iliad adds a special mystery. Athena, Apollo, Zeus, and others actively intervene in the course of events, helping their chosen ones or punishing their enemies. For the Greeks, this was a natural explanation for fate. But from a historical perspective, it may have reflected something else. The belief that the outcome of a war always depends not only on the strength of arms, but also on invisible forces, be they natural disasters, diseases, or psychological superiority. The story of the Trojan horse is no less mysterious. Was it a real military device, or just a symbol of cunning and deceit? Some believe that it could have been a siege engine or a ship disguised as a horse. Others believe that it was a metaphor. The horse signified a destructive blow of the elements or an epidemic that destroyed the city from within. Whatever the case, this image has become one of the most enduring symbols of world culture, and its true origin remains unclear. Today, scholars continue to debate the nature of the Trojan War. Some argue that it did indeed happen, albeit not in the form described by Homer. Others see it as a myth reflecting the archetypal struggle between East and West, between Greeks and barbarians. But perhaps the truth is that the Trojan War is both history and myth. It preserves real memories of battles and political conflicts, but they have been reimagined and transformed into a symbol of the eternal struggle for power, love, and glory. The mystery of the Trojan War lies in its eternal relevance. Its plots and images do not age because they touch on fundamental themes: human passions, betrayal, heroism, and fate. We still ask the same questions as the Greeks 3,000 years ago. Do we control our destiny, or are forces beyond our understanding deciding everything? And that is why the Trojan War remains an unsolved mystery. She is a bridge between history and myth, between archaeology and poetry. We can find walls and artifacts, but we will never know how close they are to Homer's world. And perhaps that is her greatest charm. She makes us believe that behind every myth there is a grain of truth, and behind every truth, the shadow of a myth. The statue of Zeus at Olympia is a lost wonder of the world. Among all the wonders of the ancient world, one stood out for its grandeur and mystical aura. We are talking about the statue of Zeus at Olympia, created by the famous master Phidias in the 5th century BC. She was considered the embodiment of not only the greatness of the main god of the Greek pantheon, but also of sacred power capable of bestowing blessings on those who saw her with their own eyes. However, the greatest creation of antiquity mysteriously disappeared and has not survived to this day in any form, except for descriptions and rare images on coins. The statue stood in the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, the site where athletes and spectators from all over Hellas gathered every 4 years to compete in the Olympic Games. Phidias sculpted it from ivory and gold using the chryselephantine technique. The god sat on a throne decorated with carvings, precious stones, and images of mythical scenes. His body shone with the whiteness of bone, and his tunic and crown were covered in gold. The height of the statue reached more than 12 meters, and it barely fit in the temple, giving the viewers the feeling that Zeus was about to rise and fly across the sky. Ancient authors claim that the sight of the statue had a mystical effect. According to the traveler Pausanias, whoever entered the temple experienced a feeling of reverent fear, as if the god himself was before him. It was believed that anyone who saw the statue became closer to immortality, because their eyes touched the image created by the hand of a master inspired by the Olympian himself. Even the Romans, who conquered Greece, did not dare to destroy the statue. On the contrary, they perceived it as a symbol of divine greatness. But despite its worldwide fame, the statue's fate is shrouded in mystery. In the 3rd century AD, the Temple of Zeus suffered from earthquakes and fires, but references to the statue can still be found in late antique sources. It was later allegedly transported to Constantinople, where it adorned the palace until it perished in yet another fire. However, there is no archaeological evidence of this move, and many historians doubt that such a colossal and fragile work could have been transported in one piece. Some believe that the statue perished right at Olympia, burning down along with the temple, and the stories about its transportation were just a legend. No less mysterious is the question of the reasons for its disappearance. Why, of all the wonders of the world, did the statue of Zeus leave so few traces behind? The pyramids and temples survived for thousands of years, but not even a fragment of it remains. Perhaps its materials were so valuable that after the destruction of the temples, the gold and ivory were taken apart and reused. But there are more mystical explanations. The statue disappeared because it could not be desecrated, and the very power of Zeus did not allow his image to remain in a world where he was no longer revered. Another mystery is how Phidias created such a magnificent work. Legends say that while working, the master asked Zeus himself for a sign whether he was pleased with the image. And then lightning struck Olympia, causing no harm to either the temple or the statue. This episode was imprinted in the people's memory as confirmation that Zeus approved of Phidias's work. Archaeologists wonder how the master managed to achieve such harmony and expressiveness, since we can only judge his work by descriptions. Today, the statue of Zeus remains a symbol of lost greatness. We can only imagine it from the words of ancient authors and rare images on coins. But even these scraps of information make us feel how strong an impression it made on contemporaries. Its disappearance turns it into an unsolved mystery that unites myth and reality. The statue of Zeus at Olympia is not only one of the wonders of the world, but also a reminder that the greatest works of human hands can disappear without a trace, leaving behind only a shadow in the memory of descendants. For some, it remains a testament to the mastery of Phidias and the power of Greek art. For others, it is a symbol of the fact that true holiness is indestructible. Its image disappears from the world, but continues to live in the human imagination. Secret cults of Dionysus, ecstasy, masks, and dark rituals. Of all the gods of ancient Greece, Dionysus was the most controversial and mysterious. He was revered as the god of wine, joy, and inspiration, but was also associated with madness, destruction, and death. The cult of Dionysus was not a simple harvest festival. It was a profound mystical experience in which man lost his individuality and merged with the forces of nature. The secret rites associated with this god are still the subject of controversy and arouse a sense of anxious admiration. The Dionysian mysteries were closely connected with the idea of ecstasy. The word ecstasy in the Greek understanding meant going beyond oneself, a state when the soul leaves the body and comes into contact with the divine. To achieve this state, cult members immersed themselves in special rituals. They put on masks, sang choral hymns, played the aulos and drums, and danced until they were completely exhausted. All this happened at night, in the mountains or forests, where the normal laws of society ceased to apply. A special place in these rituals was occupied by the Maenads, women possessed by the spirit of Dionysus. They were described as mad, dressed in animal skins, with loose hair with thyrsi, wands entwined with ivy and grapes. They danced in a frenzy, fell into a trance, and, according to the ancients, could tear apart animals, and sometimes even people, sacrificing them to the god. These scenes, terrible and mystical, show the dark side of the cult. Behind the joy of wine lurked an untamable element beyond human control. But the cult of Dionysus had another side. For its participants, it was a path to liberation. In a state of ecstasy, they felt free from the fear of death, from social constraints, and even from time itself. Wine and dance, masks and music became instruments for overcoming human boundaries. In this sense, the cult of Dionysus was a mystical experience, promising a touch of immortality through the destruction of the habitual I. Archaeological finds confirm that Dionysian cults were widespread throughout Greece. Vases depict scenes of Maenads and a satyr, a half-man, half-goat creature that symbolized an inseparable connection with the animal element. Theater, as part of Greek culture, also grew out of these rituals. Actors put on masks to become other beings, and the stage became a place where contact with the divine took place. The word tragedy itself goes back to the Song of the Goat, which directly connects theater with the rites of Dionysus. But it is the secret part of the cult that is of the greatest interest. The rituals, which took place in closed groups, were strictly guarded from outsiders. The initiates believed that at the moment of ecstasy, Dionysus entered their bodies, and they became part of his essence. For them, this was not madness, but the highest revelation. It was believed that, having lived through this experience, a person was no longer afraid of death because he saw a different state of being. There are also accounts of Dionysian mysteries, which involve the use of ritual drinks and possibly hallucinogenic substances. They enhanced the effect of trance and created a vision of oneness with the god. Some scholars suggest that these practices were related to the shamanic rites of even older cultures, which the Greeks inherited and incorporated into their religion. It is not surprising that the authorities and philosophers often treated the cult of Dionysus with suspicion. His rites violated social norms. Women and slaves in ecstasy received equal rights with men and free citizens, and in drunken dances, all conventions collapsed. This is why the cult of Dionysus was banned many times, but each time it returned again because it responded to the deepest human needs: the fear of death, the desire for freedom, and the desire for unity with nature. Even in Rome, where the cult of Dionysus was known as the cult of Bacchus, it caused a scandal. In 186 BC, the Senate issued a decree restricting the holding of bacchanalia, as these secret gatherings were perceived as a threat to order. But it was impossible to ban them completely. People's desire for this mystical experience was too great. Today, the cult of Dionysus is perceived as a symbol of the duality of human nature. It combines joy and horror, freedom and madness, life and death. Its rituals remain a mystery. Were they just a way to escape from reality, or did they really open the door to a different perception of the world? There is no answer, but this is where their power lies. The cult of Dionysus reminds us that chaos always lurks behind the facade of civilization, and that man is drawn not only to order, but also to destruction. The masks, ecstasy, and darkness of nocturnal rituals continue to haunt our imagination because they reflect what cannot be completely repressed, a deep fear and attraction to the unknown. The Orphic mysteries are secret teachings about the soul and the afterlife. In the shadow of the great cults of the Olympic gods, there was a movement that remained mysterious and enigmatic for centuries. These were the Orphics, followers of the legendary singer and prophet Orpheus, who was credited with the divine gift of penetrating into the depths of existence and revealing secrets about the immortality of the soul. The Orphic mysteries, which were widespread in various parts of Greece, promised their initiates something more than the favor of the gods. They offered hope for eternal life and liberation from the tormenting cycle of reincarnation. The myth of Orpheus was central to this movement. The son of the muse Calliope, he had such enchanting music that even the rocks and trees moved with him. But Orpheus's greatest ordeal was his journey to the underworld. When his beloved Eurydice died from a snake bite, Orpheus descended to Hades and, with the help of his lyre, convinced the Lord of the Dead to let her go. However, he violated the condition. He looked back before leaving, and Eurydice disappeared forever. This story became a symbol of man's desire to overcome death and gain immortality. It was around this myth that the Orphic beliefs arose. They taught that the human soul was immortal and imprisoned in the body. Life was seen as a test, and death as a transition to a new birth. The soul passed through many incarnations until it was cleansed of sins and reached the divine state. Initiation into the Orphic mysteries promised to speed up this path, to give the soul the knowledge necessary for salvation. One of the main elements of the cult were the so-called golden tablets, found by archaeologists in tombs throughout Greece and southern Italy. They were engraved with instructions for the soul of the deceased. What to say in the underworld, what sources to approach, what paths to avoid. In these texts, the soul addressed the gods with the words, "I am a child of the earth and the starry sky, but my lineage is heavenly." This statement showed that man belonged not only to the mortal world, but also to the eternal cosmos. The Orphic rites were hidden from outsiders. According to ancient authors, they used chants, ritual drinks, and symbolic actions related to purification. The initiates were forbidden to eat meat because it was considered a symbol of murder and desecration. They observed strict rules of life that distinguished them from ordinary Greeks. Thus, the Orphics were not only a religious movement, but also a kind of brotherhood united by secret knowledge and way of life. The Orphic teaching about the soul was very different from traditional Greek religion. For most Greeks, the underworld was a dark realm of shadows where souls existed without joy or hope. The Orphics, however, believed that the soul had a path to liberation, and that initiation into their mysteries opened the gates to a bright future. This teaching had a tremendous influence on philosophy. Pythagoras, Plato, and many other thinkers adopted the Orphic idea of the immortality of the soul and its transmigration. Orpheus himself is no less mysterious. Some scholars believe that he never existed, and his name was a symbolic image uniting various mystical practices. Others believe that he was a real religious reformer who lived in the archaic era. But regardless of the historical truth, the cult of Orpheus became the basis of a unique religious tradition, opposed to official cults. An important role in Orphism was also played by the mystical explanation of the origin of man. According to their mythology, humanity arose from the ashes of the Titans, whom Zeus struck with lightning after they tore apart the infant Dionysus. From these ashes, in which the divine and the criminal were mixed, people emerged. It followed that in every person there was a spark of the divine, but also a trace of sin. The purification of the soul became not only a desire, but also a duty. Archaeological finds, golden tablets, Orphic hymns, References in the works of philosophers confirm that the Orphic mysteries existed for many centuries. But the exact content of the rituals remains a mystery. Perhaps it was a path through symbolic death and rebirth, as in other mysteries. Perhaps they were night rituals with torches, music, and dancing, when the participants experienced ecstasy and felt the presence of the divine. Today, the Orphic mysteries continue to excite researchers and mystics. They remind us that in ancient Greece, there were not only cults devoted to the gods of Olympus, but also secret teachings that sought to answer the most important questions about life, death, and immortality. For modern man, the Orphics remain a mystery. Were they simply a religious sect, or guardians of ancient knowledge that has eluded history? One thing is certain: the Orphic mysteries were connected to the deepest aspiration of the human soul, to overcome death and find eternal life. And that is why, even after thousands of years, their teachings continue to sound like a whisper from antiquity, calling us to think about our own path and what lies beyond the visible world. Magic amulets and talismans of ancient Greece, secret amulets against fate. When we think of ancient Greece, we often picture majestic temples, philosophical schools, and heroic myths. But the daily lives of ancient people were permeated with fear of illness, the evil eye, and the evil will of gods or people. To protect themselves from these threats, the Greeks used amulets and talismans, believing that small objects could change fate, ward off envy, or even grant good luck in war and love. Archaeological finds confirm that the world of ancient magic was much closer to the average person than the official sacrifices in the temples. One of the most common amulets were eye-shaped figurines. They were used against the evil eye, a fear that haunted the Greeks everywhere. It was believed that an evil look could cause illness, poverty, or even death. To protect themselves, people wore eye amulets around their necks, placed them in babies' cradle, hung them on the doors of their houses, and even incorporated them into architectural decorations. The eye symbol was so widespread that it became part of Greek culture and has survived in the Mediterranean to this day. Another popular type of amulet was a small image of gods and heroes. Athena could grant wisdom and victory, Hera, protection of the family, Hercules, strength and fortitude. Such amulets were made of bronze, bone, clay, or semi-precious stones. They were worn by warriors going on campaigns and women expecting children. These objects played the role of personal contact with the deity, which was available to everyone and not just to priests in the temple. Amulets with magical inscriptions occupied a special place. Spells and formulas were written on small pieces of lead, bronze, or stone, designed to protect the owner. In some cases, these texts were incomprehensible even to contemporaries. Combinations of meaningless sounds and letters were considered to have magical powers because the secret language, inaccessible to ordinary people, was supposed to be understandable only to gods and spirits. Archaeologists find such objects in graves, which indicates belief in their power even after death. Amulets made of natural materials were no less important. Stones of a special shape, shells, animal bones, all of these could serve as talismans. For example, stones with holes formed by water or wind were believed to have the ability to drive away evil spirits. They were worn on strings or hung in houses. Even a simple pebble with an unusual pattern could be perceived as a sign of the gods, and therefore as a source of power. Warriors especially valued magical talismans. Archaeological excavations in Sparta and Athens have yielded small figurines in the shape of shields, spears, or helmets. They were worn as amulets to protect in battle. It was believed that they could deflect a sword or arrow if the deity heard the owner's prayer. Some warriors even buried amulets under the thresholds of their enemies' houses, hoping to weaken them before battle. It is interesting that magic amulets were used not only by commoners, but also by representatives of the nobility. There are known cases when philosophers and military leaders wore personal amulets. For some, this was a manifestation of tradition. For others, a secret source of confidence. Even the most educated people of antiquity, such as doctors or scientists, did not abandon their belief in the power of small objects that could connect a person with the world of gods and spirits. The magic of amulets also manifested itself in the love sphere. There were talismans designed to bind a lover to oneself or protect a marriage. They were made in the form of hearts, animals, or plants associated with the goddess Aphrodite. In some cases, amulets were also used for revenge. Spells were read over them, after which they were hidden in the ground to cause discord in the rival's family. The mystery of these objects is that they existed alongside official religion. In the Temple of Athena, one could pray for victory and then carry a miniature image of her with oneself. Animals were sacrificed to the gods, but small stone amulets were kept at home to protect children. This duality, belief in great rituals and small personal charms, shows how deeply magic was woven into the lives of the ancient Greeks. Today, the amulets and talismans of ancient Greece continue to amaze archaeologists. They were not works of art, but for this very reason, they convey the voice of everyday life. These tiny objects tell of the fears and hopes of people who lived thousands of years ago. Their power lay not in beauty, but in faith, and perhaps it was this faith that made them a real weapon against diseases, enemies, and fate. Mysterious spontaneous combustion of temples is a sign of the wrath of the gods. Ancient sources have preserved many stories about sudden fires that engulfed the temples of ancient Greece. These fires were considered not an accident, but a manifestation of the will of the gods. When a temple flared up for no apparent reason, people saw it as a direct warning or punishment directed against those who violated sacred laws. And although today many of these events can be explained by natural causes, for the ancient Greeks they were a mystical phenomenon, confirming the existence of an invisible force. One of the most famous cases was the fire at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. According to legend, on the very night that Alexander the Great was born, the magnificent temple, one of the 7 wonders of the world, caught fire and was destroyed. Ancient commentators saw this as a symbol. The goddess Artemis, patroness of the city, was too busy with the birth of the great conqueror to protect her sanctuary. Others saw the fire as a sign of the goddess's wrath, a warning that great changes were coming to the city. Similar stories are found in other regions of Hellas. The temples of Zeus, Demeter, and Apollo often fell victim to sudden fires. Contemporaries described how the fire would flare up instantly, as if lightning had struck directly into the sanctuary, although no traces of a thunderstorm or human intervention were found. The priests explained this by saying that the gods themselves send fire when people commit desecration. They make unfaithful sacrifices, break oaths, or deceive the gods for profit. For ancient man, a temple was not just a building, but the body of a deity, its earthly incarnation. Therefore, sudden spontaneous combustion was perceived as an act of divine presence. People saw fire as a purifying force that destroys, but at the same time returns the sacred to its original state. After such events, cleansing rituals were held in cities, special sacrifices were made, and sometimes residents even left the place, considering it cursed. Modern scientists suggest that these mysterious fires could have been caused by natural phenomena. Ancient temples used huge amounts of oil, resin, and wood. Even a small spark could cause a fire. In some places, the ground did emit gases that could flare up when in contact with fire. But such explanations do not change the fact. For the Greeks, these fires were not an accident, but part of a mystical experience. The symbolic side of spontaneous combustion is also important. In myths, fire often acted as a sign of connection between gods and people. Prometheus brought fire to humanity. Zeus punished with lightning. Hephaestus forged weapons in flames. When a temple caught fire on its own, it was perceived as the intervention of the gods without intermediaries. Such an event always caused fear and trembling, because no one knew what the divine warning would lead to. There are references that some philosophers, including the Stoics, interpreted these fires differently. For them, they were manifestations of cosmic harmony, a reminder that everything in the world is mortal, even sacred buildings. But for most ordinary people, the spontaneous combustion of a temple was a punishment from which it was necessary to seek protection in new sacrifices and prayers. The mystery of these phenomena is enhanced by the fact that many of the temples caught fire precisely at turning points in history. When cities experienced political crises or wars, temple fires were perceived as a harbinger of disasters. Thus, they became part of the collective consciousness, combining mysticism and history. Today, archaeologists find traces of these ancient fires: charred stones, melted vessels, remains of burnt wooden structures. But looking at them, we understand that for ancient people, this was not just a misfortune, but a revelation. The tongues of fire engulfing the sanctuary turned into a message that came from where the gods ruled. The mysterious spontaneous combustion of temples reminds us that for the ancient Greeks, the world was not divided into the natural and the supernatural. Every event, every natural phenomenon could be a sign, a harbinger, a mystical message. And that is why these stories have survived the centuries. They continue to instill in us the idea that behind a random fire, there may be an invisible hand of fate. Ghostly apparitions on the field of Marathon are warriors who have not been touched by death. The Battle of Marathon in 490 BC became a symbol of the courage and strength of Athens, which was able to stop the army of the powerful Persian Empire. But along with this event, one of the most mysterious legends of ancient history was born. Ever since the Greeks had won, rumors had circulated among the Attica people that the battlefield was haunted at night by the ghostly figures of warriors going on the attack, as if the land itself remembered the blood that had been spilled in those days. These stories were passed down from mouth to mouth for centuries and were perceived not as mere legends, but as real phenomena that confirmed the mystical power of the place. The ancient writer Pausanias, who traveled through Greece in the 2nd century A.D., left evidence that at the mound of the Marathon warriors, cries and blows of weapons were heard at night, as if the battle was continuing. He wrote that no one dared to approach the place after sunset. It was said that anyone who dared to disturb the peace of the warriors would die or go mad. People perceived these sounds as a reminder that the souls of the heroes continued to fight, guarding the land for which they gave their lives. Interestingly, such stories are not found only in Pausanias. Herodotus and later authors mention that the memory of the battle lived on in rituals and cults. The warriors who died at Marathon were revered almost as demigod heroes. Mounds were erected on the site of the battle, where sacrifices were made. The Athenians believed that the souls of the dead stood guard over their city, and that their shadows would come to their aid during new wars. Thus, ghostly apparitions were not just rumors, they became part of religious practice and reinforced the belief that the Athenian victory was pleasing to the gods. A special place in the legend is occupied by the figure of a hero named Eketel. According to legend, during the battle, a mysterious peasant with a plow appeared on the field, who fell upon the Persians in rage, cutting through the enemy lines. No one knew who he was or where he came from. After the victory, the Athenians began to look for this warrior, but he disappeared without a trace. Then it was decided to erect a heroon for him, a sanctuary, and Eketel himself was recognized as the messenger of the gods. The legend about him is closely intertwined with stories about ghosts. It was believed that it was he and his ghostly brothers who returned at night to enter the battle again. Modern researchers see in these stories a reflection of ancient Greek ideas about the cult of heroes. The belief that the souls of great warriors continued to live alongside the living was widespread throughout Greece. Sacrifices were held at the burial mounds of the dead. Wine, honey, and sacrificial animals were brought. It was believed that the souls accepted these gifts and responded with protection. Therefore, stories about night cries and shadows on the field of Marathon could be associated with special rituals during which participants had a mystical experience, interpreted as a meeting with dead warriors. However, there are also more rational versions. Some scientists suggest that ghost stories could have arisen due to the special acoustics of the area. The wind passing through the hills and mounds created sounds reminiscent of blows and screams. For ancient people, such phenomena were not accidental, but a sign of the presence of the supernatural. Others believe that legends appeared as a means of maintaining morale. It was important for the Athenians to believe that the victory at Marathon was not only a military success, but also a divine miracle, and that the souls of the fallen remained with them. It is no less interesting that these stories survived into the Roman era. Even 7 centuries after the battle, people continued to believe in the ghosts of the Marathon heroes. This suggests that the legend was part of the national memory that linked the Greeks to their glorious past. The ghosts here played the role not only of terrifying visions, but also of guardians of identity. They reminded descendants that freedom was won at the cost of sacrifice and that the spirit of heroes does not fade with time. Today, archaeologists have unearthed the famous burial mound at Marathon, where the remains of Athenian warriors rest. But even a scientific explanation does not remove the mysticism. Standing on the field where one of the most famous battles of antiquity took place, many feel a strange tension, as if the earth really does preserve the memory of that day. For modern tourists, this place has become a historical symbol, but for the ancients it was a sacred space where the boundary between the world of the living and the dead was erased. The legends of the ghostly apparitions on the field of Marathon show how closely history and myth were intertwined in the Greek consciousness. The victory over the Persians was a real event, but the memory of it turned into a mystical experience in which the warriors continued to live after death. For the ancient man, this was not just a metaphor. He believed that the souls of heroes really did return, and their footsteps could be heard at night among the hills. This belief reflects the very essence of the Greek worldview. The past does not die, it lives alongside the present, and the heroes who gave their lives for their homeland become eternal guardians. That is why the ghosts of Marathon have not disappeared from memory. They remain part of the great story, part of the myth that unites victory, death, and mysticism into a single whole. The mystery of the black blood in the altars, ominous signs of the gods. Sacrificial rites occupied a central place in the religious life of ancient Greece. Citizens brought animals to temples, fires were lit in altars, and the blood of the victims flowed over stones as a sign of dedication to the gods. However, in rare cases, the priests noticed something unusual and alarming: blood that flowed not red, but dark, almost black. These cases were considered terrible omens and caused horror among both the priests and the people. Ancient authors mention such signs in different eras. Black blood was associated with the wrath of the gods and the approach of a catastrophe. Sometimes its appearance was interpreted as a sign of war, sometimes as a harbinger of sea storms, diseases, or famine. In the minds of ancient people, blood was not just a physiological fluid, but a sacred substance connecting the world of people and gods. If its color became abnormal, it meant that the very order of the universe was violated. Athens had a tradition of keeping records of unusual phenomena that occurred during sacrifices. Among them are cases where the animal's blood turned out to be so thick and dark that the priests refused to continue the ritual. Sometimes such signs were taken as a direct indication that the city was on the brink of disaster. In such cases, new purification rituals were appointed, additional sacrifices were made, or embassies were sent to oracles to find out the will of the gods. There is a story that shortly before the Peloponnesian War, Athenian priests witnessed exactly such a sign. During a sacrifice in the temple, the animal's blood, instead of being scarlet, flowed in a black stream. This event caused horror, and many perceived it as a harbinger of the disasters that really befell Hellas in the following years. For contemporaries, such signs were not accidental. They were the voice of the gods, which could not be ignored. But the mystery of black blood also has possible natural explanations. Scientists suggest that it could have been coagulated animal blood or cattle diseases that changed its color. In hot climates, blood could quickly darken, and if the animal was infected, its sacrifice was perceived as a sign of desecration. However, for the ancient Greeks, such explanations were impossible. Any deviation was perceived as an intrusion of the supernatural. Such phenomena occupied a special place in the rituals associated with the chthonic deities, Hades, Persephone, Hecate. In their honor, blood was often spilled directly into the ground, and it was there, according to legend, that it could turn black. This was perceived as confirmation that the victim had reached the underworld and was accepted by those who reign among the dead. In such cases, dark blood was not considered a sign of trouble, but on the contrary, evidence of successful contact with the world of shadows. But the most ominous cases were those when black blood appeared in rites dedicated to the Olympian gods. Zeus, Apollo, or Athena demanded a pure sacrifice, and any deviation was perceived as an insult. That is why such phenomena generated fear. If even the supreme gods accepted blood tinged with darkness, it meant that the world was entering an era of turmoil. These stories still excite archaeologists and historians. In some ancient sanctuaries, traces of blood were found that had soaked into stone altars, and sometimes its color really did look darker than usual. But whether this was the result of natural processes or a reflection of a mystical reality is impossible to say. What is important is that for the people of that time, every drop of blood was not only a physical phenomenon, but also a message from beyond. Today, legends about black blood are perceived as a symbol of fear of the violation of the natural order. They show how deeply rooted in the consciousness of the ancient Greeks was the idea that the gods could speak to people through signs revealed in everyday rituals. A priest standing before an altar and seeing a dark stream of blood believed that at that moment a door to another world was opening, and the fate of an entire city depended on how he interpreted the sign. This mystery remains relevant today. It reminds us that ancient people perceived the world differently. For them, there was no boundary between the natural and the supernatural. Even in the most ordinary blood, they saw a secret, and in every change, a message from the gods. That is why stories about black blood have not disappeared from memory. They continue to live as a symbol of an encounter with the incomprehensible, and as a warning that even in familiar rituals, something can be hidden that goes beyond human understanding. The mystery of Tartarus, the mythical gates to the underworld. In the ancient Greeks' minds, the underworld was not just a place where the souls of the dead went. It was a whole universe with its own laws, deities, and enemies. Its deepest and darkest part was considered to be Tartarus, the place where Zeus cast the Titans after the victory of the Olympians. Unlike Elysium, where the souls of the righteous found peace, and unlike the realm of shadows, where the ordinary dead lived, Tartarus was a place of eternal suffering and darkness, located so deep that, according to myths, it is located below Hades, just as the earth is below the sky. Ancient texts describe Tartarus as a place surrounded by a triple row of walls and entwined by a river of fiery flow, perhaps an allusion to magma or sulfur springs. It was a place of chaos and abyss, where imprisoned titans suffered eternal torment and guarded by chthonic monsters such as the 100-headed dragon Typhon or the monstrous Cerberus who guarded the gates. Hesiod wrote in his Theogony that neither man nor God could escape from Tartarus unless Zeus himself wanted to disrupt this order. But the mystery was not only in the descriptions. The Greeks believed that Tartarus had real gates to the world of the living. In various places in Hellas, caves, crevices, and bottomless wells were pointed out, believing them to be entrances to the underworld. In the Peloponnese, there was the famous Teneron, where, as they said, Hercules descended for Cerberus and Orpheus tried to bring back Eurydice. In Boeotia, Lake Autoron was pointed out, a black lake whose waters were said to conceal the path to Hades. Even in Asia Minor, there were places where underground vapors killed animals and people, and these natural phenomena were considered proof of the proximity of Tartarus. Priests and mystics associated special rituals with these gates. Sacrifices were held in the caves, where the blood of animals flowed directly into the ground, a symbolic transfer of gifts to the underground gods. Sometimes figurines or tablets with curses were brought there so that messages would reach the shadows and spirits. For the participants in such rituals, Tartarus was not an abstract myth, but a part of reality that could be contacted through sacred places. Contemporaries saw Tartarus not only as a prison for titans, but also as an image of eternal punishment for crimes against the gods. Sisyphus, condemned to roll a stone, Tantalus, suffering from thirst and hunger, Ixion, spinning on a fiery wheel, languished there. These stories served as a warning to the living. No cunning or audacity can free one from retribution. The myth of Tartarus was a moral code in images where punishment became eternal and merciless. However, a mystery remained. Why were ideas about Tartarus so detailed? Many researchers believe that they were born from observations of nature. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, sulfur springs, all this was perceived as the breath of the underworld. When the earth opened up, people saw this as direct evidence that somewhere below there was an abyss, into which Zeus cast the Titans. Philosophers such as Plato also used the image of Tartarus. In his works it becomes an allegory, a symbol of the human soul, trapped in a circle of suffering and reincarnation. But even philosophers had the idea that behind this symbol there was a reality, a world existing parallel to ours. Today, archaeologists and historians point out that belief in Tartarus did not disappear with the end of antiquity. In Christianity, it was partly transformed into an image of hell, but retained the same features: depth, eternity, suffering. This demonstrates the universality of the myth. Man has always tried to explain what happens after death, and Tartarus became one of the first models of afterlife punishment. But the main thing that makes Tartarus such a mystery is its geography. The Greeks believed that the gates to the underworld really existed and that a person could get there under certain circumstances. This motive made the myth alive and dangerous. Next to the world of gods and people, there is always a space where it is better not to look. And every time the earth shook from earthquakes, the ancient Greeks were sure that this reminded them of Tartarus, the depths where the titans and the souls of sinners languish. Tartarus remains one of the darkest mysteries of the ancient world. It shows that for the ancient Greeks, myth was not fiction. It was their reality, in which the horrors of the underworld were as tangible as the breath of the wind or the sound of the sea. And in this myth lives a universal fear that has not disappeared even after millennia: the fear of eternal punishment and of the door leading to the abyss from which there is no return. Temples of sleep are mystical gateways to prophecy and healing. Among all the mysterious practices of ancient Greece, a special place was occupied by the so-called temples of sleep, or abatons, where people came not just to pray to the gods, but to receive answers through dreams. These places were dedicated to the god of medicine Asclepius, as well as other deities associated with healing and predictions. It was believed that it was in a dream that the gods were able to directly speak to a person, show him the causes of illnesses, or indicate the path to follow. The most famous sanctuaries of this kind were in Epidaurus, Kos, and Pergamon. People from all over Hellas and even from other regions of the Mediterranean flocked there. Visitors to the temple had to undergo preparation, purification rituals, abstinence, sacrifices. After that, they went to sleep in a special room, usually a windowless hall where silence and semi-darkness reigned. There, in the depths of the night, a person saw a dream which was considered a message from God. Dreams in the temples were interpreted by priests. Sometimes Asclepius himself appeared in a dream, touched the sick person, and healed him. Sometimes symbols were dreamed of: snakes, springs, fire, or animals. And the priests explained what they meant. For example, a snake wrapped around the body could symbolize renewal and recovery, a spring could symbolize purification, and fire could symbolize the need to expel illness through heat and sweat. Interpretations of dreams turned into recommendations. Sometimes herbs were prescribed, sometimes diet or exercise was prescribed, and sometimes additional sacrifices were required. The very conditions of staying in the Temple of Sleep gave a special mystical atmosphere. Snakes, considered sacred animals of Asclepius, lived on the territory of such sanctuaries. Patients could see them in their dreams or even feel their presence next to them at night. It was believed that this was a sign of God's intervention. In some cases, people said that they woke up healthy, as if the disease had disappeared after a night's sleep in the sanctuary. But the mystery was not only in dreams, but also in their collective power. In Epidaurus, archaeologists found entire steles with inscriptions recording miraculous healings. They mentioned cases when the blind began to see, the mute found speech, barren women gave birth to children. These records not only inspired new pilgrims, but also strengthened the belief in the magical power of sleep. The more people heard about miracles, the more they believed that they were possible. Philosophers and scientists of antiquity treated the temples of sleep differently. Hippocrates tried to explain dreams with physiology. He believed that they reflected the internal state of the body and could indicate illness. But even he admitted that dreams help doctors make diagnoses. Plato saw dreams as a path to the unconscious and believed that they could reflect not only the physical, but also the spiritual state of a person. Modern researchers suggest that the power of the temples of sleep was in the combination of psychotherapy, suggestion, and medicine. Cleansing rituals, the atmosphere of a sacred place, faith in the presence of God, all this created a powerful effect, capable of causing real changes in the psyche and body. In a sense, the temples of sleep can be called the prototype of psychotherapeutic practices. But for the ancient Greeks, everything that happened was not medicine, but a miracle. Sleep was the moment when a person ceased to be on his own and connected with the world of the gods. It became a revelation through which the path to health or understanding of fate opened. Therefore, the temples of sleep were not only hospitals, but also mystical centers where the worlds of living and supernatural forces intersected. Even after thousands of years, the idea of a temple of sleep retains its appeal. We still perceive dreams as something mysterious and sometimes premonitory of the future. But for the ancient Greeks, it was much more. Dreams in the sanctuary were the living voice of a God who came in the semi-darkness and revealed to man secrets hidden from the waking mind. The undeciphered symbols on the Knossos seals, a language forgotten by time. Crete, the heart of the Minoan civilization, has given archaeologists many artifacts that still amaze with their mystery. Among them, the Knossos seals occupy a special place, small stone or clay seals used to seal vessels, letters, and goods. Their surfaces are carved with symbols and images that still defy unambiguous interpretation. These tiny objects, created more than 3,000 years ago, open a window into the world of the Minoans, but at the same time leave more questions than answers. Seals have been found in palace ruins, tombs, and storage rooms. They are usually round or oval in shape, and their designs include images of animals, mythical creatures, abstract signs, and hieroglyph-like figures. Their purpose was practical, to protect goods from counterfeiting and to indicate the owner. But the mystery is that the seals contain symbols that are unlike any known script of ancient Greece. Archaeologists distinguish three main types of signs. The first are images of real animals: bulls, goats, fish, birds. The second are mythical creatures, sphinxes, griffins, monsters with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle. The third are abstract symbols resembling letters or numbers. Some of them are found repeatedly, which indicates possible use as a writing system. But so far, no one has been able to decipher this language of seals. Scientists speculate that the symbols may have been an early form of Minoan writing, a precursor to the famous linear A and B scripts. The problem, however, is that there is too little text on the seals to build a full-fledged deciphering system. Without long records, it is impossible to understand the grammar and meaning of the symbols. So the seals remain a mystery, like fragments of a language lost to time. The symbolism of the creatures depicted is no less curious. Bulls, for example, occupied a central place in Minoan culture, associated with bull-leaping rituals and the myth of the Minotaur. But why were they so often carved on seals? Perhaps they were symbols of power or belonging to the priestly class. The mythical creatures also raise questions. Were they a figment of the imagination or an echo of real animals that the Minoans could have seen on long journeys? Some researchers believe that seals had not only a practical but also a magical function. They could be used as amulets to protect the owner or as symbols of initiation into secret cults. This version is supported by the fact that many seals were found in tombs where their presence had no utilitarian meaning. They were probably supposed to accompany the soul of the deceased to the afterlife, acting as mystical keys. There is also a hypothesis that the seals reflected the social structure of the Minoans. The symbols could indicate membership in certain clans or priestly groups. Thus, they were not only signatures, but also a kind of passports that allowed a person to be identified in the complex system of palace society. The mystical aura surrounding the Knossos seals is enhanced by their elegance. Even the smallest of them are carved with amazing precision, as if the craftsman possessed knowledge that was later lost. The symbols seem too complex to be mere decoration. This is their secret. We do not know whether it was a language, a magical code, or a system of symbols reflecting the Minoan cosmogony. Today, the seals are kept in museums in Heraklion and Athens, where researchers continue to study them. Computer technology, databases, and cryptographic methods are used. But even with modern tools, scientists are still no closer to solving the mystery. All we have are tiny objects with images that seem to be speaking to us from the distant past in a language forgotten by time. The mystery of the Knossos seals reminds us that the history of ancient Greece is not limited to myths and the texts of philosophers. It preserves layers of older civilizations whose voices have not reached us. The seals remain silent witnesses of this era. And perhaps it is in them that knowledge is contained about how the Minoans understood the world, the gods, and man. But while this language is closed to us, the seals continue to be one of the most mysterious artifacts of the Aegean world. The mysterious disappearances of philosophers are shadows that have dissolved into history. The history of ancient Greece is full of the names of great thinkers whose ideas have survived the centuries. But along with them, there are other figures, philosophers who mysteriously disappeared from life, leaving behind only rumors and legends. These disappearances gave their images a mystical aura. Some believe that the sages left the world voluntarily, entering a special state. Others considered them to be chosen by the gods, who went into the unknown to preserve secret knowledge. One of the first mysterious disappearances was the story of Pythagoras. There are many versions of his death, but none is considered reliable. Some sources claim that he died during an attack on his school, others that he was buried secretly by his students. But there are also more mysterious stories, that Pythagoras simply disappeared, dissolving into thin air. His followers claimed that the teacher had a divine nature and could leave his body, crossing the boundaries of worlds. That is why no one saw him dead. He went where ordinary people could not follow. Even more mysterious is the fate of Democritus. According to legend, the creator of the atomic theory was considered almost immortal for a long time. His students said that he himself predicted the day of his death and managed to prolong his life for several days by inhaling the smell of honey and bread while celebrating the Thesmophoria. But there were also rumors that his body was never found. He seemed to have dissolved, leaving behind only notes and parables. For his contemporaries, this was proof that the sage had comprehended the secrets of nature so deeply that he was able to free himself from the shackles of the flesh. A special place is occupied by the story of Empedocles of Acragas. This philosopher, who taught about the four elements and the cycle of life, according to legend, ended his days in an unusual way. Some claimed that he threw himself into the mouth of the volcano Etna, wanting to prove his divine origin. Others believed that he did not die, but simply disappeared into the mountains, leaving only rumors of his rise to the gods. Even centuries later, poets mentioned him as a man who tried to become immortal and went to a world where mortals cannot set foot. No less mysterious was the disappearance of the philosopher Anaxagoras. He was accused of atheism because he claimed that the sun was a red-hot stone and not a deity. His trial ended in exile, and his subsequent fate is shrouded in mist. Some believe that he died in poverty and oblivion, others that he voluntarily left society and went into solitude, where he disappeared without a trace. In the eyes of descendants, this departure became a symbol. The philosopher who revealed the secrets of the cosmos himself became a secret. There are also lesser-known figures, such as Pherecydes of Cyrus, an early philosopher and a precursor to Pythagoras. His disappearance is also surrounded by mysticism. It was said that he was buried alive, or that the gods took him away because his knowledge was too great for mortals. Such stories are not uncommon in the ancient tradition and always emphasize that wisdom does not die, but passes on to another world. The mystery of the disappearances of philosophers has several explanations. On the one hand, these could be real historical circumstances: wars, epidemics, persecutions. In the unstable conditions of the ancient world, a person's death could easily go unnoticed, and the absence of a body gave rise to rumors of a mystical departure. On the other hand, disappearances turned into part of a legend. Students did not want to believe in the death of a teacher and created stories about his immortality or departure to the gods. But there is a deeper reason. In the Greek consciousness, the philosopher was perceived not only as a thinker, but also as a mediator between the world of people and the world of the divine. His ideas were so grandiose that death seemed too ordinary an ending. So instead of death, they were granted a mythical disappearance. Thus, real life intertwined with mysticism, creating images that lived longer than any facts. Today, these stories remain a mystery to historians. We don't know what happened to Pythagoras, Empedocles, or Democritus in their final days. But it is precisely this uncertainty that makes their figures alive and relevant. They didn't just die. They passed into legend and therefore live on in the collective memory. The mysterious disappearances of philosophers remind us that knowledge has always been perceived as something sacred and dangerous. Those who approach the secret of the universe seem to cross a boundary that was not accessible to everyone. Perhaps this is why the ancient Greeks believed that great sages do not die, but go to other worlds, becoming eternal wanderers beyond human understanding. Dark gods and forgotten cults are the hidden side of Greek religion. When we talk about the ancient Greek gods, we usually remember the majestic Olympus and its bright rulers: Zeus, Athena, Apollo, Artemis. But in parallel with this world, there were other deities, dark and sinister, who were rarely mentioned in solemn hymns. They were worshipped in secret, their names spoken in whispers, their cult associated with the underworld, nocturnal rites and sacrifices that rarely showed themselves in the light. These gods and spirits represented the other side of Greek religion, what did not make it into the golden pantheon of Olympus, but remained no less important for those who lived in fear of death, disease, and darkness. One such deity was Hecate. Her cult was widespread, but always surrounded by mysticism. She was considered the goddess of crossroads, magic, ghosts, and witchcraft. Her statues were erected on roads where three paths met, and sacrifices were made there at night, often dogs. Hecate was believed to control the shadows of the dead and could open the way to the underworld. She was depicted with 3 heads and torches in her hands, illuminating the way through the darkness. People believed that she was the one who helped sorcerers and witches, and also patronized spells written on lead tablets. Another dark deity was Moros, the spirit of inevitable death, son of Nyx, night. He was rarely depicted, but was mentioned as an inexorable force leading man to death. Unlike Thanatos, who represented a peaceful end to life, Moros brought a cruel and painful end. Belief in his existence showed that the Greeks realized that not all death was easy, and that there were forces beyond the familiar gods that could not be appeased. There were also cults of the Kira, demonic creatures that hovered over battlefields, greedily sucking the blood of dying warriors. Their images appear in Homer's Iliad. They are described as winged shadows with sharp teeth and claws. Warriors believed that it was the Kira who decided who would fall on the battlefield. Unlike Ares, the patron of war, these creatures did not bring glory. They were merciless spirits of death. No less mysterious was the cult of the Moirai, the goddesses of fate. Although they were officially revered, many Greeks regarded them with superstitious horror. Clotho spun the thread of life, Lachesis distributed it, and Atropos cut it. Their power was considered greater than that of Zeus, and this made them especially terrifying. Even the chief Olympian could not overturn the decisions of the Moirai. In the popular consciousness, they were not so much kind patronesses as cold embodiments of inevitability. The cult of the Erinyes, or Furies, is also interesting. These goddesses of vengeance persecuted those who had shed the blood of a relative. They were described as women with wings and snake hair, radiating terror. They did not let go of the victim, driving him to madness. For the Greeks, the Erinyes were a reminder that crimes against the family do not go unpunished, even if the court of men acquitted the guilty party. There are also accounts of lesser-known spirits associated with illness and misfortune. For example, epidemics were attributed to the wrath of minor chthonic deities. To appease them, secret rites were performed, often at night, with sacrifices of birds or dogs. These cults were not advertised, but were part of everyday life. People sought protection not only from Athena or Apollo, but also from invisible forces that controlled what they could not control. The peculiarity of the dark gods was that they were not glorified. They were appeased, their anger was diverted. Unlike the Olympians to whom people turned for help and gifts, these deities were approached with fear, trying not to provoke their anger. Sacrifices were made to them secretly, and sometimes even without witnesses. These were powers that could not be rejected, but also could not be brought closer to the light. Today, archaeologists find traces of these cults in the form of inscriptions, ritual pits, and objects associated with magic. But it is precisely their rarity and mystery that create a special aura. The dark gods seem to have deliberately left a minimum of traces in order to preserve their power in obscurity. These forgotten cults show that the religion of ancient Greece was not only bright and majestic, but also deeply mystical. Next to the temples of Zeus and Apollo, there were secret altars of Hecate and the Furies. And in this duality, the true picture of the ancient world is revealed. It was a world not only of reason and beauty, but also of fear, nocturnal rituals, and faith in forces that could not be controlled. The curse of the Sphinx at Thebes is a riddle that required sacrifices. Among the many myths of ancient Greece, the story of the Sphinx in Thebes occupies a special place. Unlike the Egyptian stone guardian, the Greek Sphinx was a living, terrible, and bloodthirsty monster. It was described as a creature with the body of a lioness, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. He descended upon the lands of Thebes and turned the city into a kingdom of fear, asking everyone he met a riddle. Those who could not answer died. The monster pounced on them and tore their bodies to shreds. Thus, the curse of the Sphinx became a test not only for Thebes, but for the very idea of the human mind. The myth says that the Sphinx was sent to the city by the goddess Hera, or, according to other versions, by gods cursed by fate. The monster sat on a rock at the entrance to the city and stopped every traveler. Its riddle was, "Who walks on 4 legs in the morning, on 2 in the afternoon, and on 3 in the evening?" Those who did not know the answer died. Hundreds of residents fell victim to this test, and it seemed that the city was doomed to perish. The story of the Sphinx in Thebes became a symbol of the eternal connection between knowledge and life. The monster could be dealt with not by weapons, but only by the mind. When Oedipus came to the city, he heard a riddle and gave the correct answer. It is a man who crawls on all 4s in infancy, walks on 2 legs in adulthood, and leans on a staff in old age. Having heard the answer, the Sphinx died, according to some versions, by throwing herself off a cliff, according to others. She died herself, having lost her strength. But the very nature of this myth remains a mystery. Why did the monster ask such a riddle? Perhaps it was a reflection of ancient initiation rites, where a person had to prove maturity and wisdom to gain the right to live in society. Some researchers believe that the image of the Sphinx came to Greece from Eastern cultures, where winged lions and hybrid creatures symbolized the boundary between worlds. In Thebes, this image acquired a special meaning. It became the embodiment of a curse hanging over the city and its dynasty. The riddle of the Sphinx is also connected to the mysticism of fate. Oedipus's victory over the monster did not bring liberation, but on the contrary, became the beginning of his tragic story. Having answered the question, he received power in Thebes and married his mother, not knowing her true nature. Thus, the solution to the riddle only drew him into the web of a curse. This plot shows that sometimes knowledge does not save from fate, but only leads to its fulfillment. Priests and poets saw a profound symbolism in the story of the Sphinx. For some, it represented the cruel power of nature that could only be conquered by reason. For others, it was an allegory for the mysteries of life and death that each person must unravel in order to continue on their journey. But all agree on one thing. The riddle of the Sphinx was not just a test of the mind, but a mystical test of the very essence of man. Archaeological finds confirm that the cult of the Sphinx was known in Greece. Its images are found on vases, seals, and reliefs. But it is always presented as something sinister, a creature with a human face and a predatory body, ready to attack. Unlike the Egyptian Sphinx, a symbol of wisdom and greatness, the Greek one was a product of nightmare. The Sphinx's riddle remains powerful today. It reminds us that man is constantly confronted with questions on which his life depends. To answer means to survive, not to answer means to perish. And this myth contains a universal truth. Knowledge is a weapon, but also a curse, because once a man knows the truth, he can no longer escape it. The Theban Sphinx remains one of the darkest mysteries of Greek mythology. Its story is not just a myth about a monster, but also a parable about the price of reason, about the connection between fate and choice, about the fact that every person one day faces his own riddle, and the answer depends not only on his life, but also the fate of those who walk next to him. Ancient Greece appears not only as a world of philosophers, heroes, and temples, but also as a space where shadows, whispers, and secret signs are hidden behind the glitter of marble. Here, gods could appear in dreams, blood in altars turned black, and the ghosts of warriors continued to fight after death. Here, riddles demanded sacrifices, amulets promised protection, and mysteries opened the way to immortality. Each of these stories reminds us that the ancients knew that beneath the surface of the familiar, there is always something different. And the deeper a person tries to look into the past, the more clearly he hears the voice of mystery that cannot be silenced.